Good morning, and welcome to another episode of Morning Buzz with the Energy Guy, episode number 10. Time's flying. Starting to cool off a little bit. A little hint of fall in the air, perhaps. Football is in full swing. As far as the high schools go, college will be right behind it. And then, of course, the pros are this is their third week into preseason. So get ready, folks. Fall is just around the corner. But it's nice. It's nice to get a relief from some of these warmer days that we've been experiencing in the last 2 weeks. I doubt we'll eclipse 100 degrees again, but who knows? We may. This show, again, is all about energy efficiency and how to change your lifestyle or things at home to better control some of those costs. And this show is no different today. I am going to start off in our mailbag, and we did get a question on our Facebook page through Messenger, and it's a good one. So let's start off. I want to make sure I had this last week, and I wasn't able to get to it. So I'm going to get to it now. And this is a question I get occasionally, and it's basically dealing with new home builds or a business. In this instance, someone is building a home, so they've got some land, and we've got electricity running right up to their lot. And so the expenses aren't going to be extraordinary, and we do give some discounts, I guess you could call it, if your home is all electric. So the upfront money is typically less, and then also we have you sign a 5-year contract for new construction, aid to new construction. And that is usually a contract minimum, and that minimum typically is less than what the home will consume energy-wise. So let's say we do the calculation, and it's going to be X dollars to build, 100 foot of single-phase overhead to your house with a transformer. And we tie it into the weatherhead, and say the minimum's $100 a month. Well, you're only charged $100 if you don't use 100 in energy. If you use $95 in energy, you're going to be charged $100. If you use $120 in energy, you're going to be billed $120. It's either or. It's not both. It's just whatever the higher of the two is. So many times we'll have people saying, well, I'll just write you a check for the $2,000, the additional cost. And we're like, let's just sign a 5-year contract. You're building a home. You say this is your forever home. Let's just do a 5-year contract with a 5-year $100 minimum. They're like, no, I'd rather just get it out of the way. It's like, you're not paying the $100 unless you don't use $100 in energy. And obviously an all electric, standard build home, conventional build, in most cases, a 1,500 square foot home to a 2,500 square foot home is going to use more than $100 on average per month. So keep that in mind if you're considering new construction in our service area. Again, Tom Moore, Farmers Electric Cooperative, Clovis, New Mexico, serving the high plains of eastern New Mexico. 11,000 square miles of territory, 14,000 meters, 7,200 members, 80,000 poles, and 4,000 miles of overhead power line. But we have about 900 miles of underground. So that's where this question comes in. It says, hey, Energy Guy, I'm having a new home built and I need service. Which would be better, overhead or underground? So, overhead has a transformer on a pole, right? Transformer means it transforms voltage from power line voltage, in our case, distribution voltage, which is 14,400 volts, to usable voltage that you use in your house. So it steps it down. And so that would be overhead. Underground is primary voltage, 14,400, to a pad-mounted transformer, which is near your home, right, very close to your home. And then it underground conduit from the pole to the transformer, underground conduit from the pad-mounted transformer to the house, and conduit up to your panel. So it, as far as aesthetics goes, and you'll find this in a lot of newer subdivisions that required underground just for aesthetics, but they can be practical as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over pros and cons of both underground service and overground service. Let's start with underground. Pros: not vulnerable to damage from tree branches. That's a big deal. You have a secondary wire from a pole-mounted transformer, to a lift pole, then to a house, to the weatherhead. And, if you have trees growing up in between there, they'll start rubbing on the neutral, and then before too long, the neutral may be rubbed in half. And then you've got bad voltage, so on and so forth. This can happen. We try to keep an eye on things like that. If it is on our side, for sure, we try to keep those trees trimmed away from the service wire. That's one thing. Not vulnerable to damage from tree branches. Does not interfere with views. That's the aesthetics part. No right-of-way for tree trimming is required. So we don't have invasive folks driving on your property with bucket trucks trimming trees. And when we trim trees, we're not licensed arborists. We don't butcher them at the same time, but we do what's best for us, not what's best for the tree. And what's best for us sometimes is cut a tree down, particularly when we live in elm country. Chinese elm or variation of Chinese elm. Less susceptible to damage from vehicle collisions, this underground. These are pros. Less vulnerable to blinks when animals and branches contact lines. If it's all underground, it's kind of hard for animals to be on those lines. And we experience that with overhead service. Cons of underground: more expensive to build, susceptible to flooding. We've seen that. Our builders put these generally in places where they're not in a floodplain. But we have seen junction boxes and transformers, underwater almost when we've had super, super heavy rains, but not often. They're a little more expensive to repair. Of course, we take that on. It's fed by overhead lines at some point, making lines vulnerable to outages and interruptions. So, you may be 100 feet away from the overhead line, and you're going to have those vulnerabilities we talked about a minute ago. Limitations on voltage that can be buried underground. And another con is can be vulnerable to dig-ins. And that's why it's so important to call 811 if you call before you dig, if you're doing any digging around your property, because you may forget that distribution voltage is buried underground. It's 4 feet deep, but if you're thinking about putting a swimming pool in, and a backhoe operator comes out there and just starts digging, he's likely to dig right into our primary line. And that can be very dangerous to everyone. So that's what we mean by vulnerable to dig-ins. Call 811 if you're going to dig. If you're going to dig beyond planting a tree, you need to call 811, and that will alert all utilities in the area that serve your home to come out and mark their underground or overhead. So let's look at the pros and the cons of overhead service. Pros: lower cost. Makes sense. Don't have to dig, don't have to bury anything. It's quicker to construct. our guys can put up overhead, to a home in a half a day. If the property has power running in front of it. It's easier to find and spot damage. So if there's a broken insulator or something like that, easy to spot. If there's a fuse hanging down, easy to spot. If there's a line on the ground, easy to spot. If all that stuff's underground, particularly a line, fuse in the box, it's a little more difficult to find. So it's less expensive to repair and upgrade. And it can be built in any terrain where underground necessarily can't. Cons: susceptible to wind, ice, and snow. That is what's nice about these new subdivisions that have a lot of underground. We don't have, the ice doesn't affect it. Now it'll affect it back to the line, where it originally comes in at the road. But beyond that, it's all underground, so it doesn't have that vulnerability. Cons: more vulnerable to damage from trees and vegetation, which requires right-of-way trimming. Vulnerable to blinks when animals and branches contact lines. Again, this is overhead. Another con: susceptible to damage from vehicle collisions. That happens. I don't know what it is. People on their cell phones or their minds somewhere else and they're not paying attention. We have a lot of contact on our poles. Some farmers may have tall implements and they hit one of our poles or contact one of our lines. So yeah, with overhead, that's going to happen. There's more exposure, I guess you could say. Finally, it's less attractive with the wires, going across your yard. And anyway, I thought I'd talk about that a little bit. Wanted to get that out of the way. Thanks for that question. It came in as anonymous, so aren't necessarily able to thank that listener, but hopefully they're listening and we were able to answer their question adequately. So the show today, we're 13 minutes in, so I'm going to speed up a little bit. Locating and sealing air leaks. According to the Environmental Protection Agency, 25 to 40% of the energy used for heating and cooling a typical home is lost due to air leakage. Warm air leaking into your home during the summer and leaking out of your home during the winter can waste a lot of energy dollars. That's why tightening up your home is the first step you should take in cutting your energy cost. And really, it's just a modest investment of time and effort can pay real dividends when it comes to reducing energy costs. Expert, and I'll say I'm one of them, say a $25 investment in caulking and weather stripping could result in hundreds of dollars of energy savings over time. And then, if you do it and your neighbor does it and the next guy does it, and all of a sudden we don't need as much capacity as we once had. I drive around and it frustrates the heck out of me, and I've got my wife pointing it out now. Parking lights, security lights, or, big box stores where there are lights on at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. They may be LED, so they use a third of the energy, and they're supposed to last 3 times or 4 times as long. But if you burn them 24/7, they're using twice the energy they were rated to use. If they were only working, on 10 hours a night, and you're cutting their life expectancy in half by burning them all the time. And a lot of large stores are built on demand. It's like 3-phase power, built on demand, and those lights are on during the peak. And that's how a third of their bill is figured on peak demand. So if they had all those parking lights turned off, that would lower their peak demand, and that billing component would not even be a part of the formula. So yeah, I even see city rentals lights that, that are out there, and the city's paying for them, but they're on all the time. So I say city rentals, I mean city lights, like on a highway, and they're on, and I'm thinking, that's taxpayer dollars now, right? If the city's renting them from a utility, now it's become taxpayer dollars. And I guess it just aggravates me. Now it's aggravating my wife. It's funny. She points them out everywhere we go. So, typical air leakage locations. I'm looking at a pie chart. Electrical outlets, 2% of the air leakage, 2% of that goes through the electrical outlets. And it doesn't have to be on an outside wall, because they can be, if they're on the interior wall, there's no insulation necessarily, and it goes right up to the attic. So there's attic air right behind the switch, the light switch or the outlet on an interior wall. The exterior wall probably has insulation on it, but the interior, it's right up to the attic. And I would suggest put those little foam insulation pads behind light switches. And I would put them, and outlet covers. I would put those. And we have a few here. So if you're a local listener, you can come by and get a packet of those. Just say you heard it on Morning Buzz with the Energy Guy, and we'll get you one of those. But yeah, that will help a lot. I put my hand on a windy day in front of an interior outlet, and it was during the winter, like it was November, December, and I could feel cold air just streaming out of it. So those little foam behind the plate covers work wonders. Fan and vents, 4%. Windows, 10%. Doors, 11%. Plumbing holes, I don't have a percentage on that one. Fireplace, 14%. And that's a fireplace that's not sealed well, doesn't have the damper closed. Oftentimes, people leave the damper open, and even if they're not burning a fire, or they'll leave the damper open during the summertime, and all that cool air is escaping that way. Shut those dampers if you're not using a fireplace. Now, remember to open it if you start burning the fire. You'll know pretty quick when your living room fills up with smoke. Ducts, like duct work, not quack quack ducts, but the duct work in your attic, 15%. Floors, walls, and ceilings, 31%. I should add, if I did all that math real quick, I could figure out what plumbing holes is. It looks like it on the chart. It looks like it's about 12%. So let's just go with that, 12%. How does air escape? Air leaks in and out of your home through every hole, nook, and cranny. Common leakage sites include plumbing holes. That's a big one. Plumbing holes. So, how much time do we have? We're at 18 minutes. Plumbing holes. I'll go into a home, particularly if it's like pre-1970. And I'll do a quick and dirty audit. People say, man, I feel these drafts in my house. Our electric bill is really high, or our gas heating bill is very high. So I'll just do a quick and dirty audit, and I'll go into the kitchen, and I look in the cabinet under the sink, and there's this big old hole cut for these little small, 1.5 inch pipes. But there's this big exposure to crawl space or something like that. Or a wall that doesn't have insulation that goes to the attic. It's just, that's a place where you really need to get down there, plug those holes with that expanding foam. It's very cheap. I promise you'd pay for it in savings in about 3 months. You'd pay for that can in savings just from plugging that one hole. So those plumbing holes through walls, those are a place to really look closely. Floors and ceilings, around chimneys, fireplace dampers, attic access hutches, that's another big one. How many times you get into your attic access lid and there's no insulation on it. You need about 4 or 6 inches of insulation on top of that, just glued to it, so that when you move it, it stays on it. But when you put it back in place, it's in line with the rest of your insulation. We've talked about this a little bit. Electrical outlets and switches, moldings around windows, doors, and baseboards, and drop ceilings above bathtubs and kitchen cabinets. Those are huge. So how do you get started? Well, you repair all the obvious sources of air leaks first, such as broken windows. I've seen single pane windows broken. There's no storm window or anything like that. And they're already very energy inefficient. So replace those. Holes where air can enter the ceilings, walls, and floor. Check anywhere building materials join and look for daylight that is visible through the cracks. That's a big deal. If you can see daylight, there's air getting in or out. After these have been properly sealed, you'll be ready to tighten up other less obvious air leakage, because that was the stuff that's most obviously, like what my mom used to say, that stick out like a sore thumb. Caulking and weather stripping is a big deal. Caulking is used between non-moving parts where the gap is less than, say, a half an inch wide. For instance, between a window frame and the wall. And you want to apply caulk on a clean, dry surface after removing any old caulk or paint. You can do that with a 5-in-1 tool. The best time to caulk is during the dry weather when the temperature is above 45 degrees. Here's you remember that saying, talk is cheap? Talk, like words, talk is cheap. Actions mean a lot more. Well, caulk is cheap. When in doubt, if you don't know, caulk is cheap, and when in doubt, caulk. And I would suggest using a clear silicone caulk. You can't see it on a painted surface. You put a bead down, and then you use one of those plastic spoons is perfect for this. Smoothing it out. Use your finger. Wet your finger and press it into the crack, and then into that 90-degree angle. Wipe your finger off. Get it wet again. Do it over and over until you'll be a pro in no time. Weather stripping. It comes in cleverly designed strips of felt, rubber, metal, or plastic that fills the spaces around doors, windows, attic hatches. It compresses and seals when they are shut. And there are a variety of weather stripping materials available from your local hardware store. And there are some that are better than others. I got some not long ago, and we've got a little second home, kind of a getaway. And my son used it when he was in college, and he just graduated. He's actually headed to Michigan. He's headed to Kalkaska, Michigan. He's a forest technician. So his degree was in forest management. But so he's moving a long ways away. All 3 of my kids now will be in Michigan, so maybe I'll have to join them someday. But I don't know. I hear it's cold up there. I looked at his little town of Kalkaska, and I was just curious. So I haven't told him yet, but the average snowfall is 127 inches. A little different than Clovis, New Mexico. So, but he loves the outdoors. He loves water. He loves woods, trees. He loves trails. He loves hiking. He loves fishing. So this will be right up his alley. So he's young enough to be able to handle it. I don't know. The older I get, the colder I get. There are some no-cost things you can do, surprisingly. Identify and prioritize where leakage may be taking place. Air leakage locations are not always obvious and easy to find. Prioritize your air sealing strategy by identifying the biggest leads first. On a windy day, this is what I was talking about earlier, locate leaks by running your hand near those leaky sites I mentioned earlier. I didn't mention around windows, but you do it around windows, around outlets, around outlet covers, around light switches. And then you'll know what to do. I mentioned those foam backing pads that are available. Again, we've got some here. Come by. Say you heard it on Morning Buzz with the Energy Guy, and we will give you those free of charge. Lock your windows to make sure they are shut. Locking a window helps create an airtight seal. My windows are old. They are vintage 1947 double hung single pane, but they work. Somebody asked me when I bought this old farmhouse, "You gonna replace the windows?" And I go, "Are you kidding?" I think the contractor that built this house would come back to haunt me if I did that. They work. They're beautiful, multi-pane, single pane, unpainted on the inside. On the outside, they're painted. But then I've put storm windows, good storm windows, powder coated white, and they're pretty tight. And then I've done some caulking because it's cheap. And then I had some doubt. I didn't know if there was any air coming in. So when in doubt, I say caulk, because caulk is cheap. Talked about this already a little bit. Keep the fireplace damper closed when the fireplace is not in use. Even when the damper is closed, it is still leaking air and taking your money up the chimney. Of course, fireplaces aren't very efficient, are they? My show may go a little over today, because I do want to talk about this day in history, but we'll try to wrap this up pretty quickly. We're at 27 minutes. Let's see. Low-cost window putty glazing compound is used to seal a loose window or a broken, replaced window pane. Select the best product to do the job. Ask your local hardware store attendant for the best sealing product for your project. Discuss the location, service type, size of the leak, etc. Seal the leaks. The best and most effective place to seal a home is on the inside. This not only prevents air movement, it also prevents moisture from accumulating in the wall and ceiling cavities. Caulk the leaks. We talked about that. Let's see. Foam backer rod is used to fill large and deep cracks. And let's see. I'm skipping some of this. It took me a while to write some of this. Electrical outlet cover gadgets. Reduce air leakage. That's what I was talking about earlier. Although the savings are small, about 2% of the heating and cooling costs are lost or move out that way. The cost is also low, and it's easy to do it yourself project. I mean, it's just a couple of screws. Put those, what I called here, outlet cover gadgets or pads. Again, available here. Farmers Electric for free. Yeah, check your duct work upstairs in your attic. I read an article once that said 50% of high bill concerns can be diagnosed in the attic, and what they were talking about was loose ductwork. And you can use some of that metallic duct tape. I wouldn't use the gray duct tape. I mean, unless that's all you had, but metallic duct tape. And then there's also this gooey stuff called mastic, and it is probably the most effective at sealing ductwork, but it is messy, super sticky. I mean, you apply it with gloves and a brush, and you get it all over everything. It's have you seen those mouse traps that are sticky, and you might accidentally get your hand or something stuck in it that doesn't belong in it, and it's hard to get away from those. Just like the mouse, once they get on there, there's no going back. But call me. I can do a quick and dirty audit. If you're local, if you're one of our members, there are some cooperatives around the country that have budgeted monies for a little more in-depth audits, and those can be effective. But normally a quick and dirty audit from somebody from the cooperative that may be their energy guy can find and probably diagnose about 80% of your loss. So that's pretty good, and it's free of charge if you're a Farmers Electric member. And then there's some that share cost. Like I know there's some investor-owned utilities that they'll do a $1,000 energy audit, but you're expected to have a little skin in the game. I don't know what that might be, but they just can't, throw out $1,000 every time somebody wants an audit. And I've heard of folks auditing houses that were built 3 years ago, and it just doesn't make a lot of sense, but perhaps. But get ready to have a little skin in the game. And then, of course, once those areas of loss are discovered, then you need to take the necessary steps to mitigate those losses, which may cost you a little, or listen to the show again and pick up on some of those low-cost, no-cost things that we talked about. This day in history. Found a couple of things that were pretty interesting. August 23rd, 1926, the death of silent screen idol Rudolph Valentino. He died at the age of 31. Sent his fans into a hysterical state of mass mourning. I guess he was like the first teen idol, that kind of fame. 1926. I'd heard of Rudolph Valentino. I've never watched these movies because I kind of like to hear. I don't like to read, dialogue. I would rather hear the actors speak. So yeah, these were silent films. In his brief film career, the Italian-born actor established a reputation as an on and off the screen lover boy. After his death from the ruptured ulcer was announced, dozens of suicide attempts were reported, and the actor's most recent lover was said to be inconsolable. Tens of thousands of people paid tribute at his open casket in New York City, and 100,000 mourners lined the streets outside the church where funeral services were held. Valentino's body then traveled by train to Hollywood, where he was laid to rest. This day in history, August 23rd, 1947. We have a couple of baseball stories for you today, but this one involves the Little League World Series Championship, which is happening as we speak, the World Series of Little League. And I don't know how many teams are involved now, but there's a lot more now than they were in 1947. And that was the year of the first Little League World Series Championship game. It was a culmination of a 3-day tournament in Williamsport, Pennsylvania, and they still have the championship to this day at Williamsport. That is the headquarters of Little League. It features teams from Pennsylvania. Now, before roughly 2,500 fans, Maynard, a team from Williamsport, defeated Lock Haven 16-7 to win the title at the original field. Now there's more than just Pennsylvania teams now. I guess even in that one, I'm reading further down, it said there was 11 of the 12 teams were from Pennsylvania. There's one outlier, and that was a team from Atlantic City, New Jersey. But now there's Mexico, there's Japan, there's Singapore, there's the United States has a number of different teams, regional champions, from Texas and New Jersey and California and New Mexico. So I don't know, the series seems to take a long time, but I think it's probably winding down. These kids probably need to get back to school. Here's the other baseball story. August 23rd, 1989. As punishment for betting on baseball, Cincinnati Reds manager-player Pete Rose accepts a settlement that includes a lifetime ban from the game of baseball. That was a sad moment for us baseball fans. The ban is publicly announced the following morning. A heated debate continued to rage until Rose's suspension was finally lifted on May 13 of this year. Unfortunately, Rose did not live to see his suspension lifted. He passed away at the age of 83 on September 30th, 2024. Rose remains the game's all-time hits leader. Well, that's it. 35 minutes and 35 seconds. I appreciate you listening to Morning Buzz with the Energy Guy. We'll see you next time.